Welcome to Just Thinking. This is Mary Greendale. The title of this show grew out of a lifetime of curiosity about many different subjects. Some local, some global, and some in between. For each show, I will open with my thoughts and then bring on guests who explore the subject in greater detail. I hope the show inspires healthy discussions on camera and among viewers. To me, the sky's the limit when we are just thinking. Welcome to Just Thinking. We've all seen the headlines lately, one disaster after another. That got me to thinking, what about Holliston? Do we have a disaster plan? I know there used to be one, but do we keep it up? What do we do to prepare for our own disasters should they ever come? And we're bound to get something sometime. So I decided that I would go straight to the sources, and those would be the folks who are in charge of such situations for us. They're not exactly in order here as we sit with the panel. That is the head, the director of the emergency management is Fire Chief Mike Cassidy. And all of a sudden it was a blank, but it came back, thank God. Then of course, closely followed by Matt Stone, Chief of Police, and Sean Reese, who is the director of the D.P.W. So you three folks together sort of comprised what would be the first response kind of team or whatever, I would assume. So let's just start with some basics. I'm using my phone tonight because I left the printed piece of paper. But anyway, so what is a disaster preparedness plan for this region? What does it involve? Does it involve us? How? That kind of thing.
So I'll start with that. The town has a comprehensive emergency management plan, which is referred to as the SEM plan, that is submitted to the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, and it is reviewed on an annual basis by the town before it is sent up to the state for their review and for their cataloging.
Do they approve or disapprove it, or is it just to know you have one?
They don't get into the specifics and wouldn't really tell us that we had a bad plan, but if there were sections that were missing, they would give it back to us and tell us we need to put more detail in. So they do review it for content and for form.
But we could be doing something egregiously wrong.
It's possible that a community could be doing that, but we're not.
We're not. There you go.
Absolutely
Smooth save. Okay, so how did that get put together?
So the state has a template, which is a basis by which all communities in the Commonwealth submit their SEM plan. And from that, each community is tasked with figuring out the specific elements to their community. Because each community has different hazards. For us, we don't have a lot of railroad hazards. We're not within an emergency planning zone for a nuclear power plant. We're not a coastal community. So right off the bat, we're different from some other communities in the Commonwealth, and those annexes in their plan would be much more robust than our plan. We do have regular roads and the transportation routes. We have places of assembly. We have special populations. So each community has that sort of special situations that they need to plan for.
Do we have any of those high-ranking criteria? We don't even really have a river that might overflow. We have a bunch of streams.
Right, and we do have areas that are prone to flooding. Washington Street up in the 1900 block, the Queens, parts of Winter Street, and there are several areas that are prone to flooding due to the beaver intrusion.
Okay. And we can't do anything about them, really, as part of this.
Limited in terms of what we're allowed to do. So
you can't put in your plan that you really need to eliminate them, huh? Okay. So who does it involve locally?
So the SEM plan involves all of the departments here as well as others, including public health.
Okay.
And their resources are listed. The state has a list of what different communities have, so that if another community has a problem, they can sometimes say, have you considered reaching out to your neighbor and seeing if you could borrow a backhoe or a bearcat or whatever the community might have a need for?
So how do these other departments fit in? I'll start with you, Matt.
Sure. So the plan that we have, it's one thing to have a plan and put it on a shelf and then do nothing with it and not look over it. Part of what we do through our accreditation process is the chief made up a presentation for our officers. So each patrol supervisor has been tasked with going over that plan with our officers, making sure that they're aware, any questions and any issues that come up prior to having to implement the plan, those are addressed and worked out and questions asked, et cetera. So it's an active plan that we use often, that our officers and our supervisors are well versed in case we had to implement it.
Okay. How about you, Sean?
We don't necessarily have a plan in place, but we're on call. Our responsibility would mainly to be respond. So if we were called in by the fire or by the PD for our on-call, if we're after hours, whether it be a tree down or a loss of power in an event of at a treatment plant, we have backup power at those facilities, so we're able to get everything up and running. Even if there's loss of grid power, we can still operate at the plants, and we would just respond accordingly depending on what the event was. If it was a tree down and we were able to handle it, we cut it in-house. If not, then we may have to contact
Whomever.
an outside company, right, if we're on power line or anything like that.
Okay, just figuring the worst, we were just talking a moment ago about Puerto Rico. So everything's down, nobody's got power, streets are blocked, blah, blah, blah. So then I'm assuming that ends up back in the director's office to kind of figure out the steps to get you out of this situation.
Correct. So as the emergency management director, I would be working with the elected officials, the Board of Selectmen. We would determine whether or not it was appropriate for us to declare a localized state of emergency, which is a declaration that indicates that we have exceeded our resource capability, and therefore we're going to need additional assistance from outside. Now, that's additional assistance beyond our normal mutual aid agreements, but if you had that kind of widespread devastation, we're not going to be able to turn to our neighbors because they're going to have the same issues with trees down, power out, and all of their personnel are going to be strapped as well. So a declaration doesn't suddenly free up a pile of money, but it does allow us to exceed certain spending limits and allows us to execute certain emergency powers from a purchasing and resource development standpoint.
So you're basically saying that the state is on some level assuming some financial burden for these costs, or are we?
We are on the hook for the money. There's no guarantee that even if we declare a localized state of emergency, that there would be a state declaration or a presidential declaration. Even when a declaration does come from the federal government, it's 75% of eligible expenses, and we're on the hook for those 100% until that reimbursement comes in. And that reimbursement can come 9, 12 months later, sometimes 2 to 3 years later. So the town is on the hook for that money initially, and if they're able to get money back, that's great. If not, the taxpayers are shouldering that burden.
So I know I've heard the statement that if you have a local emergency, assuming it's not one that's the whole region, you should plan on the fact of not seeing any help for 48 hours or 72 hours or something like that. What is the real number?
The emergency management principle is you should be self-sufficient for 48 to 72 hours.
Okay.
So that's an understanding that, we as a local community might not see any power resources, might not see any National Guard resources, might not see any outside resources for 2 to 3 days.
Okay, so let's just do a sort of a make-believe that that's the case. How do I, as the average resident, how do I prepare? How do I know what to do? Maybe for just myself and my family, or maybe for people that I also am responsible for, an aged mother somewhere in town or whatever.
Sure. So from an emergency management planning standpoint, we always encourage people to be prepared for anything. There are certain types of emergencies, such as the ones that we were talking about earlier, the Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Jose, Hurricane Maria. Those are notice events. You see the forecast, you know those are coming. When we're going to have a blizzard, those don't just creep up on us. The meteorologists are forecasting those for days. And that's when you have the opportunity to go to the store, to stock up on food supplies, to make sure you've got batteries, check to see if you've got gasoline for your generator, making sure that the generator will start. You can do all of those individual preparation steps as an individual or a family. It's those no-notice events that come come up upon us, whether it's an electrical storm in the summer or whether it's a tornado, things that you may not have as much notice for. Those are the ones where the same principles apply. So you should always have a couple bottles of water available at your home, and the guideline is 1 gallon per person. You should have foodstuffs that are available for you to be able to prepare without electricity. But if it's a canned good, make sure you've got a can opener that's not electric, because a lot of people stock up on canned goods and then suddenly realize they can't crack into those cans for lack of an 89-cent, tool.
Yeah.
And so you need to know ahead of time, are you responsible for someone? Is it a family member? Is it a pet? Is it someone with special medical needs where you need to advocate for yourself and your family? And we would encourage everyone to have an individual family plan. Just like we train students what to do when they're in school, and if the fire alarm goes off, they know that they're going to stop what they're doing, go to the door, go to a prearranged meeting place. We encourage families to have a plan as well, so that if something happens in their community and they're not going to be able to stay in the house because they don't have power, they're not going to have power for a while, are they going to be able to go to a relative's house? Are they going to choose to try and go to a hotel? What is their plan?
Do we ever have community training of, us, the folks? Are there ever any seminars or whatever?
So we'll push out material or information and tips on social media. When a storm is coming, we'll remind people about making sure that they leave the faucet on so that there's a trickle, so that if they lose power, that the pipes don't freeze and create a secondary problem. We'll talk to them about making sure that if they're using a generator at home, that it's at least 20 feet away from the house so the exhaust isn't coming to the house and causing a carbon monoxide problem. We caution people on the use of candles when there's power outages. So we do our best to push information when we have people's attention. On a sunny blue sky day, if I'm pushing out a message on social media about make sure to keep your generator away from your home, it's going to fall on deaf ears. But when people start to ramp up and have that anxiety because the meteorologists and the forecasters and every news cycle is letting everyone know about the storm of the century of epic proportions that we've never seen before, all of a sudden we have a captive audience, and that's the time to push our message out.
Okay. I'll get back to that in a minute. So I wanted to go back to so we have a localized situation. From a police standpoint, are we aware of looting ever becoming an issue in Holliston? Have we ever had a situation? I'm thinking in my own mind, I can't think of anything, but clearly if we had a regional thing, you might find some different dynamics going on, but just for a localized thing.
I know we haven't here in Holliston that I'm aware of, if it was that catastrophic or that big, but just not changing back to the Chief's topic, but I think having a plan and the whole common sense and just having an idea of, what you're going to do as a citizen if something does happen, whether you're at home, whether you're at the grocery store, whether you're at the movie theater. Whatever the incident is, you should have a plan in your head, just like when they do their airplane review.
Practices.
How many times have you heard the airplane instructions, before taking off? It's just one thing that you think about ahead of time, if you have a plan with flashlights and candles. But I think that would be our message is common sense when it comes to that. If it comes to specific incidents, hurricanes, weather, whatever the issue is, then we would give out specific advisories. But in terms of looting and large-scale events like that, I wouldn't see that being an issue here in Holliston.
Okay. And from your standpoint, Sean, what happens if the people who have to travel a distance to get to us, so the staff that don't live right here? I don't know how much that even applies to your department. Could be true for, not for yours.
It could be true in any case.
Yeah.
I mean,
so if you have a regional.
Well, we would have to utilize the person that's the closest. If you were on call, had to come in, if nobody could get back here, we'd have to call the person who lived locally or in Holliston.
Yeah.
I mean, they go through an on-call rotation, so it's possible that somebody could be further away. But in the event that it was a forecasted situation, we would prepare for that. If it were something that just a tornado all of a sudden erupted, and we were unable to get here, if I wasn't able to get here or somebody further, we'd have to call somebody who was closer.
So if you knew that there was something forecasted, would you set up a situation where everybody's on call, or that everybody would be expected to come to Holliston ahead of time, or how would that work?
Well, a typical in Public Works is a snowstorm. So if
Yeah.
you knew there was a blizzard forecasted, everybody's here ahead of
Okay.
when the roadway deteriorates or when we're going to be called out. We would respond to when police say, okay, the roads are slippery now, go, but the staff is already here.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
so
snow
we're
is
prepared
unusual.
as far as that's concerned. But if a tornado blew through town, I mean, and there was any damage, then we respond accordingly. But again, we would work with, if you can't get here and there's other roads are out, then we deal with it individually.
And although it's rare, there have been a few occasions in the last several years where a travel ban has been issued by the state government. And when that occurs, the people who would be responding in for any of these departments would be an exception.
Sure.
And they have identification from their department that they would, if they were stopped at, a roadblock, or they were the only car that was traveling down a street and they were pulled over by the local law enforcement, they would be able to explain why it is that they were on the roadway when people were encouraged not to be there.
I can remember 1978 with the big blizzard. You probably remember it as a kid.
Different perspective.
I remember it as an adult trying to get home from Springfield. But at any rate, it seemed like there were police and Department of Public Works or Highway Department at that time, trucks and everything all over the place. I mean, they were seemed like there were more of them than we usually had, saying they must have.
Yeah, different level of forecasting then. So the important thing is when they impose a travel ban, don't travel. Because
Yeah, exactly.
we can't plow the roads if we can't.
Exactly.
We're stuck. If you're stuck, we're stuck.
Yeah, no, I know.
It's the same
one of
type
those
of
common
principle.
sense things that just drives me nuts when I see people out when there's a travel ban. It's like, oh my God, people's, think about everybody else, not just yourselves. But I want to talk about one kind of crisis or disaster that we don't typically talk about, and that is wildfire. And I've talked to you about it in the past because I'm just curious about it when you watch the stuff in the West and everybody's talking about how close houses are to their woods. Well, with the drought that we had not this year, but last year, and given that every house in Holliston has woods as neighbors, except for maybe Mudville, even there you could get a couple of places where you might have a problem. What is that kind of protection? What's the defense there? What do we do? Do we know what we do? Do I know what I do?
So it's what's referred to as a defensible space. So you want to have a separation with the low ground cover between the house and the tree line. So,
So grass or something like that.
Or stones, gravel, that's even better as a separation because the wildfire will extend right through the grass and then be able to catch the shingles on the side of the house. So if you can have a break between your structure and the wildland and the woods, that's your best option.
Do you know that not for nothing, I had another panel on here another time we were talking about ticks. And if you have a border at the back of your property or all around your property of stone, that's a foot wide, ticks don't cross over stone. And that was one of the sort of preventive things that you could do in your yard to limit the number of ticks. Look at this, you get 2 for the price of 1.
And you don't have to mow stones.
And you don't have to mow stones, which is the best reason in town. Absolutely. All right, so then do you folks do any coordinated training about any of this, or is this just, we've got the plan, we know what we have to do kind of thing?
So as the emergency management director, I've provided training to both departments, as well as obviously my own, as well as local government. And we have in the past done tabletop exercises where we gather together and we do a scenario very similar to what you started to unfold, but we actually have specific injects and we ask different players within the exercise.
Yeah.
This has just been announced. What would you do? What resources would you bring to bear? What resources would you not have available that you'd need to reach out and there would be a delay getting? And then we move on to the next inject in the time frame of the exercise. And it's a very instructive process.
Is this something that you do on an annual basis, or you just do it at random?
We haven't done it on an annual basis, and I was actually discussing with Chief Stone earlier the fact that since there have been some changes with some key personnel in departments in the last couple of years, it might not be a bad idea for us to have another one of those.
Now, would that include like the Board of Health too?
Depending on what scenario we were using.
Okay.
So some scenarios are more Board of Health involved than others. Pandemic, some sort of a water emergency obviously would involve the Board of Health. But depending on what scenario we pick, it may or may not have a lot of opportunity for them to, quote, play. But they could be there as an observer.
What was the thing that we were supposed to be coming together to do as a disaster preparedness thing that was a state initiative? And they were like in regions. I got on the first committee for it not too many years ago.
The
Jim
MRCs?
Conley. Yeah, that's what it was.
So some communities have more active MRCs. A lot of those have morphed into providing support for when a local shelter is going to be opened.
Okay, because a lot of that was around the public health stuff.
Right.
And, you know, we were concerned with all kinds of things in terms of public health, even down to the owner of a dog and the owner gets sick and what do you do with the dog, that kind of thing. So is there any of that still going on here?
Actually, Scott Moles, our public health director, he is very involved at the regional level and is very keyed into preparedness issues, and we communicate often about making sure that lines of communication open between myself and his department. And
what happens in a pandemic as far as your offices?
Well, in regards to water, the state requires us to have an emergency response plan as far as, in particular to water, in case, God forbid, there's ever a boil order. Like, where are we going to buy water from? Who are we going to get it? You know, certain state supplies of that. So we're required to respond in certain ways to certain emergencies, but the state needs to be aware of kind of what our form of a plan is. So they require us to have a response plan in regards to water specifically.
Well, and in a pandemic, I should think that would become, that could be very critical, even more so than the paint incident that we had when we had our boil water thingy back in whatever year that was, 2005, sorry.
I would just add to what the chief was saying too about communication.
Yep.
I think that's the biggest part of our planning is we don't communicate when these things happen. We communicate throughout the year and throughout different issues that come up. Part of that is we usually do an after-action report too. So if we have a big event or a hurricane or an incident that happens, you know, we'll meet afterwards, either department heads or department members, and talk about what we did well and what we could work on for next time, what resources we may have needed or that weren't readily available, and how we could kind of improve. So it's a kind of a constant upkeep of our plan. So I think when, you know, the chief alluded to communication, I think that's a big part of our planning process.
One thing that we have today that we didn't have, 5 years ago is the reverse 911 or whatever you call it for real, because I know there's another name for it, in that as a way of communicating to the public. I mean, that's probably the best thing that ever happened from the standpoint you want to get out a message that, preparedness, go get your milk now and get off the roads.
One comment. Now, every emergency isn't it's not a tornado. There's things that happen on a daily basis in this town.
Sure.
So whether it's a water main break, we need to notify, or, so the departments work well together. So an emergency can be as simple as we need to close a road. Public Works has to close a road. So we notify the PD, we can barricade it, we can get a detail. So we do things on a daily basis for the public that not everything is, a catastrophe. So there's stuff ongoing all the time.
But let's just take that one. That's just an interesting thing. So you decide that because of some water break, you're going to barricade a road. You come in, you barricade the road. The on-call firefighters, do they know that you're going to barricade a road?
Dispatch is informed, and therefore if they are toning out and dispatching personnel, they would be including that in their message so that personnel know to avoid a specific route.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
And the call either comes from PD or the fire department if it's after hours to the water department. So typically they're instructed to call the fire department in an event of a water emergency, so they know right away. And then we go out and we notify the PD if sometimes there's a cruiser there, or sometimes they discover it first. I guess it depends on who discovers it first, but all the departments are notified of what's going on. And if there's a road closing, we let them know it's open to emergency vehicles only, or it's closed altogether, and we find alternate routes. And
that's a huge responsibility that we undertake.
Sure.
You just restricted someone's access to their home, to a relative's house, and to take on that responsibility, you have to have a plan in action, and be sure of an estimated time of how long this is going to take, who we're going to allow access to, who we're not going to allow access to. So to say close a road and put a barricade up seems very easily, but it takes a lot of coordination. It takes a lot of collaboration between our 3 departments in order to say, okay, we've decided to close it down. This is who's allowed in there, and this is how long it's going to stay open or closed for. So
in the springtime, when it comes to paving and reclamation of roads, that advanced planning is done months in advance with the PD, with the fire, with the busing department, with the school department. We try to get everybody on the same page the best we can and stick to the schedule as close as we can. So,
and these are all core competencies that we exercise on a daily and weekly basis, so that when the big event comes, we're already very comfortable doing this, and it's just on a larger scale with more resources coming to bear. So whether it's a tree that comes down in the Queens and blocks a road and there's a power outage, all 3 of our departments are there. D.P.W. comes, they cut up the tree, push it off to the side, Eversource arrives, they try to figure out which fuse is tripped, and the police are standing by for traffic, and as long as there's an electrical hazard, the fire department's there, and then we all go back to our other stuff. It's just that when a storm or a large event happens, instead of one event happening, and that's what we're able to focus exclusively on, I mean, in some of the storms that we've had in the last couple of years, we've broken records with the number of calls that we've managed within a 24-hour period.
Snowstorms?
Yeah.
A couple years ago when it was
well, last year we had it, because it was a relatively warm winter, that when there's no frost in the ground, that the frost actually helps hold those trees up.
Yeah.
So if you get a wet storm or windy storm, we can tend to knock more trees. Last year we had a significant amount of trees down Ashland Street, Maple Street, all over the place, out on the other side of Washington Street towards the Milford line. There was stuff down everywhere, but it was well coordinated. I mean, we all worked together, and
we prioritize. If there's electrical wires involved, there are limitations to what the D.P.W. crew can do, but if there's no involvement with the wires, then they get on it right away.
So who's responsible for the communication that goes to the public?
So as the Emergency Management Director, I am the main facilitator for the Blackboard Connect system. We have trained individuals from other departments to be able to use it. However, when we launched this system, we were very clear that we would only use it for emergency notifications in terms of the voice messages.
Yep.
We'll use the email side to let people know, don't forget town meeting's coming up.
Yep.
Here's a link to the warrant. But we want to make sure that if their phone caller ID indicates town of Holliston, that it is something that is significant, that needs their immediate attention and perhaps their action.
Yeah.
So we try not to use the system too much. There are some times where I see things on social media, people want to know why they weren't notified that there was a single road closure, 15 houses impacted. They want to know why we didn't do a blanket notification of the town, because we don't want this to be a case of the boy who cried wolf, where people just start screening our calls. We want, if that caller ID says Town of Holliston, we want them to pick up knowing that it's something important, really important.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And then going back to that pandemic, and I admit that I realize this is a Board of Health thing, but so in the situation of a pandemic, it could very well be that many of the very people that we need to manage disasters within the community could be among those who fall victim to whatever the pandemic is, just because very often they're the first responders and exposed to so many things. So do we take that kind of stuff into consideration? Is that kind of what Scott's trying to work on and work with you guys about?
I think some of those planning assumptions were planned for between a quarter and a third of your workforce not being available. So
a quarter and a third, okay.
So understand that a significant amount of your day-to-day normal staffing would be unable, either because they themselves were impacted by whatever the disease was, or a family member, which would prevent them from being able to come into work.
Okay, okay. And all of that ties into shelters and stuff too. I mean, you've got people go to shelters and some are sick and some aren't sick, and so then everybody's sick kind of thing.
And the planning assumption on shelters has really changed in the last 5 to 10 years. It used to be that 351 cities and towns in the Commonwealth all planned that they would open up their own local shelter.
Yeah.
And that is not an efficient model. The last time that we opened up a local shelter here in Holliston, we had 2 residents that showed up. And it takes a lot of personnel, and it's very time and resource intensive for us to open up a shelter, which is pulling away resources from perhaps other operational and field activities. So the planning these days, and I've been involved in both the planning as well as the exercising at the regional and state level with MEMA, is for regional shelters. And the understanding is that instead of opening 351 shelters, that maybe we'll open 2 to 6. And they'll be on a regional basis. And people may facilitate transportation. We may have a point where we decide that if you need to go to a shelter, we'll pick you up and we'll take you to Framingham.
Yeah.
Because it's much more efficient. And then some of our MRC volunteers would be able to go and do a shift during an operational period in Framingham.
Got it. Got it. So going back to the question of resources, because Matt mentioned that, in all of these things, you're going to do your after incident report, and you're going to sit down and nosh about how things went and everything else like that. Are we well funded in terms of what we need for response to these events? I mean, are there resources, that is, equipment or people power too? Are we solid? What are we missing?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, from the police side of it, we're putting together or planning an emergency response trailer that we would have access to at our PD with barricades, flashlights, cones, extra outfits, uniforms, for us to use personally for the police department, because sometimes you come in for what you think is going to be an 8-hour shift, and now you have somebody staying 16, 20 hours, because of an incident happening. So to have that ability, I know the fire chief has access to that now, which we share when we need, but it would be a nice tool to have for us to have right at the PD. In terms of personnel, I don't think you can ever have too many personnel, too many people to help, depending on the size of the incident. For example, I think it was 2 years ago when the trees came down downtown. We had to shut Route 16 down during commuting hours for 10+ hours. You can never have enough people there, never have enough sawhorses or personnel to help in a situation like that. So I think we do very, very well for the resources that we do have.
And there's really nothing you can do about that. I mean, let's face it, all the manpower in the world can't outnumber the number of drivers that you have trying to go down Route 16. I mean, you're outnumbered right from the get-go.
So with the size departments that we have, I think we do a very good job with response, timeliness, and getting to those people that need the most help the quickest. Do you have a list of people who need help?
So lists are a touchy topic. The power company, Eversource, maintains a list of critical customers who have folks on life-sustaining devices. They make that list available to us in real time when there is an impending storm. So our list is as up-to-date as the last storm, because for confidentiality reasons, people are hesitant to communicate that sort of thing to local government on a regular basis, because they're concerned that that list could fall into the wrong hands, and then they could find themselves victims because it would be shown that they might not be able to secure their home or their possessions.
That's sad.
Yeah, so as much as some communities will try to do a registry through like their senior center or their council on aging, you find there's a reticence because people just, especially here in New England, want to maintain their privacy. And if they've gone through the process of getting a note from a doctor that says that they need power to be restored as quickly as possible because they're on life-sustaining equipment, the power company understands they need to share that with local responders. And then we find out in real time as well when someone calls us and says, my loved one is on oxygen, our compressor is not working, do you have a spare bottle that you could bring us? Then suddenly we know that they are on durable medical equipment.
Just imagining the number of generators one could need in certain situations. I mean, there can't be enough generators, I suppose, under some of these situations that you run into. couldn't have enough, or too many, let me put it that way.
I think that comes into, again, the whole planning thing. You know, if you're going to be one of those people that go out, you know, 6 hours before a storm to get a generator or whatever you may need, you know, it's about planning. You may use it twice, you may use it 3 times in 1 year, but knowing you know, me personally, I know I have a generator home that's ready to go if needed. I may never use it, but if I do need it, I know it's there and I know it works. So it's a lot of it's about planning and kind of being prepared for whatever the incident is. You know I have flashlights, I know I have candles, you know, in the case that we do need it. Hopefully we never do, but it's nice to have it ready to go if you need it. So that's when it comes down to kind of planning and being prepared for that. That's what we would recommend, I think.
And assuming some personal responsibility. If you know that you live in a part of town that floods on a regular basis and you have a sump pump, then you either need to have a sump pump with a backup battery or a generator that you can plug your sump pump into. Because
There's nothing anybody can do.
well, it's the first time that we come and with a portable generator that we loan you for a storm, we realize, okay, you may have just moved into town. You didn't realize that the water rose that quickly when you lost power. But the second or third storm into their residency, when the same people keep calling us and keep expecting us to bring our resources again and again for something that really comes down to being their responsibility. So I agree with the chief. Them planning ahead of time and taking the steps that they need to advocate for themselves and their property and their family.
The other thing I think that people need to be responsible for, but remember and plan for, is just things like medication lists and that kind of stuff. I keep on the refrigerator one of those emergency whatever thingies that the senior center gave out years and years and years ago, long before I was even a senior. And I just thought, heck, it's true for me, no matter, you know, younger or older, that I take medications, and there are some things that are, you know, not going to go well with what I take. So I just, you know, have that there, but turn around and ask people, do you know what medications you're on? Oh, I don't know. You know, do your kids know what medications you're on? It's like, no, I don't think so. I've never talked to them about it. And it's like, wow, that's really not a good idea.
Having been an EMT for over 25 years, I can tell you that a lot of people are much better at describing the pills that they take by the color and the shape than they are by
the long orange ones.
the actual name, which doesn't really help us when we're on the way to the hospital. So I agree with you. People need to share that information, and you should have a go bag, just like.
I was going to ask you about the go bag.
Yeah, and you need to have a backup supply of things, including medication. So if you are fortunate enough to get your medication through the mail and you've got a 90-day supply, you know, try and get that prescription filled a little bit early and put a few pills aside if they're not going to spoil, just so that in case you need to go, you've got them at the ready.
Right.
I think keeping it updated, too, is the number one thing. You know, you may have done, when you first got the list however many years ago, have you updated that list?
I have.
You know, has your medication list been updated? Has your contact list been updated?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing, too, because, you know, especially when we go into some of these homes, it's very helpful to have an immediate either red folder or if it's on the refrigerator to say, okay, who is this person's son or daughter? Who's the best person to contact? Who's the closest?
Yeah.
Because if you're in an emergency or whatever disaster, the last thing you want to be thinking about is who to call when you need them. It's better to prepare for that ahead of time. I just saw recently down on a fuse box a picture of someone's animals and says, please don't forget with their 2 animals' names that, you know, there was a dog and a cat inside the house.
I can do that.
You know, so it's good to kind of let us know who, you know, we're coming into your house maybe for the first time and maybe the only time, who the people are to call and what type of medications you're on.
And it's important to have a backup of your contacts as well. So often people are using their electronic device as their address book. But if you're without power for 3 or 4 days and you haven't been able to charge your phone, then you may not know your son or daughter's phone number by memory.
Yeah, it's .1.
Exactly. So when pressed, people can't always produce. I was at a call a couple months ago where someone was challenged to find a phone number for their offspring, and we had to go through 4 or 5 different phone calls of other people before we were able to get a current phone number for their loved one so that we could advocate for them.
Good point. Good point. Now, are you ready at home? Do you have all this stuff done at home?
I do. But one important, not to get off topic, but one important thing too for people to realize is just they need to set realistic expectations as far as how we manage the emergencies. Now, so on the public works side, so number one is snow removal or snow plowing. I mean, if we're getting 18 inches of snow and it comes at 10 p.m., then they probably are not going to be able to get out at 6 a.m. the next morning. But that pressure's there. They just assume they'll be able to go to work in the morning, everything's fine. But we're out there all night long. There's only so much we can handle at one time. So sometimes those expectations are just above what we can really manage. Even when it comes to a water main break, we may not be able to get your water on in 3 hours. But we're out there getting it done as quickly as we possibly can. But I think in today's world, people it's instant.
Right.
Gratification, like they want the water back right now. They want to be able to go out, it's snowing now, but I want to be able to go out to the store in 10 minutes. So sometimes you have to, those need to be managed a little bit.
What happens when somebody's, okay, I've been without my water for the last 4.5 hours. So do you get calls?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately we do.
People that are angry with you.
Sometimes they are. Now, most people aren't.
Okay.
And most people have an understanding, particularly in this town, of the type of infrastructure that we have, and it's not an uncommon occurrence, unfortunately. But some people sometimes are upset. We had one last year on the night of Thanksgiving. We were out there all night, and one street, I think it was Elm Street, had no water. But everybody, they were all understanding that evening, so it was great. But don't forget, the crews that are responding to these emergencies have families, and they want to be home as well.
Yeah.
We don't want to be out there all night either.
You're not doing it just to hang around.
We're trying to get everything on as quick as we can. So some people are maybe angry, and I mean, you just deal with that individually.
Do you have extra people on the phones and stuff like that during situations like that?
No, if we're after hours and we weren't there, we'd go right to the fire department.
Lucky
they're aware. So I try to give them as much, say, hey, we think we can be done another 2 hours. We think we're going to be, so take another 3 hours. And if a resident calls and they go right to the fire department, they say, oh, they said, another 2 hours. And sometimes it's just patience, that's all.
Does that system work out well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've been taking calls for them off hours for years, but the key, and this reinforces what the chief said earlier and what Sean is saying, the key is communication. So the more updates we get from Sean or his crews in the field, the more realistic information we can provide the public. If all we know is when the dispatcher comes in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that, water's out on such and such a street between this number and this number, and then we don't hear from them again until they call to say, hey, just wanted to let you know we turned the water back on, we're going blind. But if they're giving us updates saying we're making progress, it looks like we're going to be another 2 to 3 hours, or we've made the connection, we're flushing right now, we hope to turn it back on for the residents within half an hour, the more information we have, the easier it is for us to take those calls from the public.
Yeah, and keep people happy.
I'll make one little plug for our social media pages.
Yeah.
For all the departments. I don't know if the highway is.
No. Every now and again, I let Sean know if there's something out there he wants to think about.
We have a very well followed social media page.
And we actually I'm sorry, Chief, but we do put on water emergency on the PD's Facebook page. They have the largest, users or the following, so.
So ours is growing, Facebook, social media, Instagram, and I think people.
And tweets.
Tweets. It relieves a lot of those phone calls, and it gives us an opportunity to let people update. I know in my hometown, if I know there's an incident going on, or if I have a question, it's like, before I pick up the phone and call, I'm just going to check their page, and usually 8 out of 10 times, what I'm looking for is right on the top of their feed. So if people don't know our page exists, or the fire department page, it's a good tool, it's free, and I think we constantly update it all the time. So it's a good way to stay involved.
You guys have one
We've
too.
got Facebook, we've got Twitter, absolutely.
Yeah. These guys use Twitter a lot.
Absolutely.
Even more than the superintendent of schools. And he has a blog.
And that's another thing too. With Sean was mentioning with the schools, people are going to wonder, are the school bus running?
Yep.
So we get calls from the superintendent, we share it, we'll get information from the fire department, and we all end up sharing each other's posts with the effort or thought process that it's going to reach that many more people. So.
I think, I understand how all of the different departments work in terms of hierarchy and so forth, but is yours a particular challenge because you do have this sort of scatter site of 50 people of
50. What'd you do with my other 40? I've got 90 employees.
however many you got this year. I lose track of how many you accumulate them.
I don't think it's a challenge. I actually think it's a benefit. It's actually an asset for me to have people embedded through the community. In fact, we saw that back in June where there was a reported structure fire in the Brentwood development, and one of our firefighters was literally 4 doors down.
Right.
And he was able to go and take actions prior to the arrival of the other resources and made the difference between just a room and contents fire and a fully involved structure fire that people would be displaced from.
Well, I was thinking more in terms of the communication pieces. I mean, we're talking about, Facebook and that kind of thing. Not everybody is predisposed to read those, monitor those,
Sure.
Or whatever. So you have different levels of that kind of activity within the department. Is there anything that's sort of like a given? You need to check this page, whatever. You need to check here. This is where we'll post things. Is there any way that...
So I push information to our department members via email,
Okay.
And don't really use the social media to inform them. If I'm posting something into social media that they need to know, I would have already sent it out via email.
Okay, so you're using email for that. Okay. Texts?
We don't do a lot of group texting. We do have texting capability, and we'll use that for like the dive team. But for our regular departments, it's a voice tone pager that we're still using.
We're just going to do a little sidebar over here. The dive team. Now, there's something many people I don't think even realize we have.
Sure.
We're talking about emergencies that might occur on one of the bodies of water. Not all of them are all that deep right now, but certainly the lake at the very least. What is the dive team?
So our dive team is comprised of members from our department, different companies, as well as from the ambulance corps. They train on a regular basis. Some of them are also involved in the regional dive team. So we've got multiple layers of dive capability. We've got internal capability that we can do for both open water as well as ice. And then, if need be, we can either get supplemented by a district dive team, or at times we are augmenting their resources as well.
Yeah, I just think it's amazing. I mean, we are a little town. We're not a baby town. Like, I went to an assessors meeting a couple of weeks ago out in western Massachusetts, and I was with people from the towns that have 400 people and 600 people, and listening to their stories. I mean, you talk about a tough road to hoe, trying to organize things within a community when you got 400 people. You talk about the same people showing up for everything. And those communities, it's beyond the pale. But at any rate, when by 15,000 even is really not that many people when you strip out the kids who aren't going to be serving on the department and that kind of stuff.
We'll start them young. We'll start them as explorers at 14.
That's never missing an opportunity to jump in there with a plug for.
It's been a great feeder program for our staffing over the years.
It has been. There's definitely true. I think that's a good thing. Maybe you need, perhaps not yours, because I think yours is probably handing kids weapons and stuff wouldn't be good. But you might try a little. What would you call it? Explorers for the water department.
They do have teen help during the winter. Some of the shovelers of the sidewalks and they've got summer help as well.
We have summer help. I mean, there's New England Water Works, American Water Works has conservation resources where you can talk to kids or bring them through the water plants. We haven't done that yet, but those types of activities are available to get kids interested, not so much water treatment working for a highway department, but more on the lines of conservation or how important water is, that type of stuff. Those resources are certainly available. But we have good community involvement as far as summer help. So if those kids develop an interest in this line of work, this profession, then they can certainly kind of move forward with it.
I would add, too, I'd be remiss if we didn't give credit to the auxiliary police.
Oh, my God, wouldn't we?
Yeah, the auxiliary police,
Wow.
It's a big part of our department that helps out in exactly events like this. So we're short personnel, and we only have so much sworn personnel available, either shift work or whatever. We can call the auxiliary police who come out at no charge to the town, and they come on their own time and are trained and are capable and are uniformed. And they've come out in many times, either through storms or disasters or big incidents that we're dealing with, and they lend, it's like having almost a mini department available at our resources. So
There are a lot of them on it too, right?
there are, yeah.
No.
They're well-trained and well-guided, so I would be remiss if I didn't give them credit.
Yeah, it's extremely beneficial for police details, too, for the work that we do in roadway.
Absolutely.
So.
Or all of the events that we have. I mean, whether it's Celebrate Holliston or whatever. I mean, they're there. They are a wonderful group. There's no question. You're right. We should include them. I have one question, but if I don't
Water is important.
take a sip of water, I'm going to be coughing all over the phone or the mic. Communication is obviously, one of the key things that holds everything together, and it sounds like, you've got all of that behind the scenes with you guys doing all of the major part of that. Is there anything that the community can or should do to improve communications on our end? That is, letting you know things, asking for things in other places than Facebook, because I'll admit it drives me crazy when people get on Facebook. I like Facebook. I'm not saying I don't, but it drives me absolutely, for the length of time that it takes you to type in whatever sarcastic message you have about whichever department you're complaining about, you could have picked up the phone and gotten the right answer. You might get the right answer on Facebook, but chances are you might not. So is there anything, what do we need to do on this side?
Well, I think to the chief's point earlier, if people understand that there are authoritative social media pages out there, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Instagram, that we use those to push out specific information, and that people turn there first. I see the same posts that you do,
Good point.
and I'm just as frustrated when I see someone questioning there. And there are times where, I'll give you an example of just a mundane routine thing. I'll see the same question routinely throughout the year. People want to know, is trash delayed this week? And what I will do is I will cut and paste the link from the town's website that shows trash and recycling delayed 1 day this week due to Monday holiday. Because I'm trying to equip people to understand that the information is out there. You just need to put out a little bit of effort to go look for it. But these are the places to look for it. The town's website, the department's social media, my department's social media, because that's where people should be going, not all of the sub-pages on Facebook.
Yeah, the rants and whatever that one is. That one's, I had to get myself off of that one. Every once in a while I'll peek in and see what people are ranting and raving about, but I gotta say, after, some period of time of watching it, it was like, I can't deal with this one anymore.
So you had mentioned, no matter what form of communication, we try to cover every aspect. There's people that say they weren't notified, or we weren't notified. We try to avoid using reverse 911, because again, I don't want people to get in the habit thinking it's just, they're letting us know they're hydrant flushing. So no matter how many avenues or channels we use, there's always going to be people who aren't notified. But
Or miss
we
the
try and
notification.
cover as much as we can. If we brought message boards, we try and put message boards out there. So we're hydrant flushing now, okay?
Yeah.
So and that's not necessarily an emergency, but there's 2 message boards throughout town. We rotate them throughout town. It's on the town's website. There's a daily listing of the streets we're hydrant flushing, but we cannot call every individual homeowner. It's just not a realistic expectation. So you'll get the calls that say, I didn't know you were hydrant flushing, but so then it's a fine line to say, well, it's here and there and there, and it's only so many things you can do. There's very rare is there a situation in town that we are not aware of, if it comes to Public Works or PD or fire, that the dirty water. I know, and we're well aware of that, but there's no short-term solution when it comes to that. Everything's long-term projects. So we encourage those individuals to call the water office. It's a water type of thing. All that stuff is documented. Everything is recorded and logged into your particular account, and so we kind of address it on an individual basis. But
To
I just
reiterate-
need to call.
To reiterate what Sean said, having realistic expectations, I remember one water emergency that we had in the mid-2000 era. We had someone who called up and was very upset that they did not receive a notification call. And we asked them, well, what's your number and what's your address so that we can check our database? And they were very upset and said, well, I have an unlisted number. And so they wouldn't give us the number, but were upset that we hadn't contacted them. So sometimes expectations are not realistic.
Expectations
also-
and common sense.
And people need to sign up for that. The Holliston
Yep.
The Blackboard.
Blackboard, they need to be part of that.
Okay, so
'cause
we'll
we do
reiterate
put
that.
communication out there.
So let's go back. If in fact you are not listed, or you're not sure if you're listed, or if your phone has changed, or if you've given up your landline and you're just using your cell phone,
You've changed your internet service provider.
or whatever else could have happened, whatever, they should call.
They should go to the website and sign up for Blackboard Connect from the town website.
Look at that, you don't even have to call.
No.
It's,
And you have the,
townofholliston.us.
you can receive.
You can receive
phone
texts,
calls,
you can receive phone calls, emails. You can prioritize which ones you want the notification to come on.
yep. Okay, any messages you folks have for folks to get out there and do that common sense thing? Pack the go bag, make sure your medications lists are up to date.
Yeah, be prepared ahead of time, have your contact list updated, because when an emergency does happen, that's the last point
That's
you want to
not-
start thinking
yeah.
about it. You want to think about it ahead of time, and you hope that you never have to use it. But just like anything else, fire drills, airplane warnings, school safety, it's all preparation and communication. So whatever you can do ahead of time, I think, would serve everybody better.
Well, guys, thank you very much. I hope that people... I thought I shut that off. I now know that the alarm goes on even when the phone is shut off. Okay, so thank you very much for coming on. Sean, I think that your comment about trying to be realistic in the expectations, especially in snowstorms, is one that we really need to drive home, because you're absolutely right. Everybody has the idea that their driveway or their street is needs to be plowed by much earlier than is perhaps realistic. So at any rate, thank you, gentlemen, very much. I hope we don't ever have to do these major things, but just in case we do, we know we've got a good team in place. Okay, so that's it for today. We're going to be ready for any disaster that comes our way. Hope we have none. Hope you have none. And until next time, talk to you.